Everybody. Welcome back to Platonic Soul. I hope you've all been well. So, in the last several episodes, I've been talking about how, as the Western world has started over the last 125 years or so to study these unitive states scientifically, it seems to come to the conclusion that they're good for the brain, for human mental and physical, even health, and that they answer to a natural human need. I've also argued that the core purpose of religion, this was in our last episode, seems to be to elicit these states, to bring them about, and to incorporate through habits like regular ritual and prayer a sense of oneness into our daily lives. So there's kind of an obvious question here, I think, that must arise for most of us. If oneness is good for you and religion is about realizing it, then why has religion seemed so unattractive to many of us in the modern West? I've talked in episodes before about how Enlightenment thinking has really been eroding at religion since the time of the Enlightenment in the 18th century, or even earlier. So why has the world, this post-Enlightenment world, been gradually abandoning religion? The answer to these questions may seem obvious to you, but I believe, or at least I suspect, that by the time you've reached the end of this video, the answer will seem a little more complex, maybe, than it appears at first. It's possible you may also end up being a bit more concerned than you were before, but with good reason, because the answer that I'm proposing points to a serious danger, a really difficult challenge that threatens our time. So, of course, the world as a whole hasn't rejected religion. The number of religious people in the world is actually growing faster than the number of people with no religion. But in Europe, North America, and the parts of the world that are closely aligned to them in culture, religion seems to have been in more or less a steady decline since the late 18th century, as Enlightenment culture has increasingly cut, or seemed to cut, the ground out from underneath it. The standard post-Enlightenment critique of religion that we're used to hearing today from people like Richard Dawkins is that it's a cruel delusion, a delusion that feeds injustices of various sorts. A lot of the tenets of religion, or at least their literal interpretations, have been disproved by modern science and reason. These include the ideas about the physical universe, like geocentrism, for example, this idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, that were taught by the Church until the discoveries of Copernicus and Kepler, and they also include more recent ideas like creationism that have been, of course, undermined by Darwin and other scientists. Skepticism about the claims of Christianity actually isn't new. According to the book of Acts in the New Testament, the people of Athens burst out laughing at St. Paul when he started to talk about the resurrection of the dead. But this relentless doubting and questioning spirit of the Enlightenment has been eroding religious belief in a much more systematic way. The Enlightenment has also argued that these delusions are not just harmful, but have served to justify a lot of irrational and cruel practices. Voltaire, who, like many Enlightenment thinkers, actually claimed a sort of rationalistic faith in God, all the while attacking religion, famously wrote in one exchange with an opponent about miracles, "Once your faith, sir, persuades you to believe what your intelligence declares to be absurd, beware lest you likewise sacrifice your reason in the conduct of your life. In days gone by, there were people who said to us, 'You believe in incomprehensible, contradictory, and impossible things because we have commanded you to. Now then, commit unjust acts, because we likewise order you to do so.' Nothing could be more convincing. Certainly anyone who has the power to make you believe absurdities has the power to make you commit injustices. If you do not use the intelligence with which God endowed your mind to resist believing impossibilities, you will not be able to use the sense of justice which God planted in your heart to resist a command to do evil. Once a single faculty of your soul has been tyrannized, all the other faculties will submit to the same fate. This has been the cause of all the religious crimes that have flooded the earth. So I think it's kind of undeniable that there's a certain amount of truth to this, because we see in religion a lot that seems simply irrational, like these dietary rules that seem to serve no practical purpose, and all kinds of, to put it bluntly and perhaps somewhat unfairly, other superstitions. And we see in the Old Testament, for example, God-given orders to commit genocide and mass murder. And for example, in Deuteronomy, it's written, "If you hear it said about one of the towns the Lord your God is giving you to live in, that troublemakers have arisen among you and have led the people of their town astray, saying, 'Let us go and worship other gods, gods you have not known,' then you must inquire, probe, and investigate it thoroughly. And if it is true, and it has been proved that this detestable thing has been done among you, you must certainly put to the sword all who live in that town. You must destroy it completely, both its people and its livestock. You are to gather all the plunder of the town into the middle of the public square and completely burn the town and all its plunder as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. That town is to remain a ruin forever, never to be rebuilt, and none of the condemned things are to be found in your hands. Then the Lord will turn from his fierce anger, will show you mercy, and will have compassion on you. He will increase your numbers, as he promised on oath to your ancestors, because you obey the Lord your God by keeping all his commands that I am giving you today and doing what is right in his eyes." So that's one passage of Deuteronomy, and at times, literally interpreted, religion appears at the same time cruel and yet irrational to the point almost of absurdity. There's another passage a bit later in the same book of the Bible. "If two men are fighting, the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no pity." The list of cruelties sanctioned by religions and religious institutions is longer than I have time to go into here. Just to give some examples, and I'm sure you're familiar with all or most, if not all of these. Human sacrifice, religious wars and persecutions, use of religion to justify conquest, colonization, and slavery, and prejudice of all kinds. Not to mention all kinds of abuses of children in church-run schools. We've all heard of these things. So the question then becomes, why has religion been so irrational and cruel when its purpose has been to serve a natural human need? And the answer to this question, in my opinion, is extremely important. The thing is that religion has not really known itself. It has not actually been consciously aware of what it's been trying to achieve. Its attempt to incorporate oneness into people's lives has always been through a kind of unconscious clutching after something it doesn't really understand. I think it's inconceivable that religion could have arisen out of a conscious realization by our remote ancestors that they craved oneness. It's just not how religion works. It seems much more likely that they were spurred to create these rites and stories and images by a yearning they weren't really capable of describing, at least in non-religious terms. Of course, there's a propensity in all animals for rituals, so the rituals they found themselves acting out in the hopes that they would realize this kind of oneness must have felt natural to them in a way. But it's religion's ignorance of its own core purpose, I believe, that has made it susceptible to such irrationality and cruelty, and vulnerable to the attacks of the Enlightenment. This ignorance has meant that it's been a kind of clutching to satisfy an extremely powerful yearning, this yearning for oneness, which has always been easily prone to misdirection, sometimes horrific misdirection. In my last episode, I talked about the various other attempts that have been made to explain religion, explanations that I think are all true to some extent. The fact is that religion, through its history, has served many purposes in addition to its main one, and I think its ignorance of its purpose was what allowed this to happen. It meant that all sorts of other things could attach to religion. Because religion didn't know consciously what it was after, it was drawn to whatever reminded it of this, of unity. But the incomplete or false unities that it chased have been responsible for a lot of harm. One of these false unities, I think, is in the false sense of reassurance that the world is under our control, when religion has been used as a kind of proto-technology, as I talked about last time. If I follow this traditional practice that is believed to please the gods, then this wished for outcome is more likely to happen. The downside of this is that it then becomes of utmost importance for the community to keep up the divinely given laws that are part of this proto-technology. The whole community will suffer if something happens to keep the vast machinery of divine human relations operational. So punishments are given out to transgressors that to us today seem shockingly harsh. But the main false oneness that comes to my mind is the unity we feel in social cohesion. I think through the history of religion, this unity would have felt very appealing to people because it would have lessened these primal abandonment fears that humans have always, also I think largely unconsciously, suffered from. The downside, of course, though, is that enhancing social cohesion through these rituals and dogmas has the effect of dehumanizing people on the outside, thus scapegoating of individuals, and on a communal level, genocidal tendencies. And another huge consideration is that just as religion hasn't understood its core purpose, it is either not understood or not cared about the, in a way, ambivalent effect that oneness has on the human mind. Of course, we've talked a lot about how science seems to be showing how these unitive states can be good for us. But science has also cautioned us about them. For example, in that paper we talked about a few episodes ago, the one by the neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris, that talks about the effect of psychedelic drugs on the brain. He also mentions that they tend to lessen reality testing and self-awareness. He speculates that these things could be linked to depression when taken to extremes, this reality testing and self-awareness. But of course, they're not things we want to lose altogether. They're precious parts of being human. And so he writes of using psychedelics in therapy, quote, moving the brain out of subcritical modes, and by subcritical he actually means the everyday consciousness, and into unfamiliar terrain may present some risks, e.g., loss of contact with reality and persistent magical or delusional thinking, if not properly managed. So he's put in these kind of objective, kind of clinical terms, this sort of massive problem that I'm trying to get at. The human mind in these unitive states, under the effect of psychedelic drugs, or in sexual relationships or religion, is vulnerable to losing its reality testing capacity and its self-awareness in ways that aren't always going to be good. While these states have been found to bring lots of benefits to human health, mental and otherwise, it's also true that unthinkingly putting people into these states is really playing with fire. In religion in particular, I'm thinking of fanaticism, which has been, of course, massively harmful through the ages. And of course, this has been another big cause of concern to people since the Enlightenment and before. And finally, of course, because religion didn't understand what it was trying to achieve, it hasn't been able to explain the benefits it's been trying, and to a considerable degree succeeding in bringing about. We really only saw that with William James. We really only saw the beginning of that with William James at the turn of the 20th century. You may remember he talked about religion as a way for the conscious mind to tap into the energies of the unconscious. And so the West has been dumping religion, though I think not entirely with the results that the detractors of religion may have hoped for. The big problem, I think at least as big a problem as religion's own ignorance of how it works in people's brains, is that religion's detractors also have not been fully aware of this, at least not for the most part, and not until recently. Crucially, that inquiring Enlightenment spirit that has continued to influence our time has not been aware of the fact that religion, in trying to incorporate oneness into human life, has been answering to a natural human need, and quite a deep one. And that deep but mostly unconscious human yearning won't simply go away. It won't let itself be unsatisfied. When it's been ignored, it's found ways to try to satisfy itself. And some of the most violent cataclysms in human history have been the result. So I think on that note, we'll end for today. I'd like to look in a little bit more detail at this next time. But for now, I'll say thanks for watching and hope to see you then.